Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mary Sorrenti, and I'm the Vice President of GamePill. I'm very excited to be here today to discuss how to set up your studio for acquisition. I am joined by a panel of industry veterans. I have Keith Warner from New World Interactive, Scott Nye from Inflection, Guillaume Prévost from founder and studio head of Compulsion Games. They will be able to walk you through some of the things that you need to consider, and perhaps more importantly, the pros and cons or do's and don'ts of acquisitions. So without further ado, let's meet the panelists. Scott, let's start with you. Do you want to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about Inflection's journey to acquisition?
Sure, thank you. So Scott and I with Inflection Games, we're a studio based out of Edmonton, Alberta. Our current team size is about 100 folks. We were previously part of the Probable family. Probable is a London-based UK tech startup, and through some conversations that happened over the summer, as they were taking a look at some of their strategic options, and we were obviously still interested in pursuing getting our game Nightingale to market, and the best way to make that happen. And both parties were very interested in seeing that happen. So the best solution for us was to be effectively carved out of Improbable, and through that, Tencent was interested in taking a majority stake in our studio and continuing to help us bring Nightingale to players. And so, interesting process, and we'll get into some of the more details or specifics about it as we talk here further. But I come at this from a finance and accounting perspective. I'm the COO of Inflection. I've been here since we started up under the Improbable banner. There's 4 of us on day one that walked through the studio doors, and as I say, we're now up to about 100 people working primarily in Edmonton, but we do have some remote folks in Toronto and Vancouver. And in fact, a couple of team members still working with us over in London and in the UK.
Wonderful. And coming from that accounting finance background is so important when you're talking about acquisitions, that as I'm sure we will get into shortly. Gam, over to you. How did Compulsion go from a studio founded in 2009 to one that was acquired by Microsoft in 2018?
Well, I started the studio by myself doing contract work. So it was a one-man shop. And I am not someone who had an extensive financial background when I started. Certainly developed quite a lot of financial knowledge and networks over the years. But I'm a creator first. The studio grew. We shipped. 2009 was the early days to be independent. The Steam hadn't really taken off yet. There was a few examples on Xbox Live Arcade. So we started out small, made a first project called Contrast, which we shipped on the hardware launch of the PlayStation 4 with Sony, and then moved on to create a game called We Happy Few, which quickly grew more hype than we had the team to manage. The team went from 7 people when we started to 38 people when we were shipping, all of it through different leveraging mechanisms. So we did everything in the book on that project, from going to PAX, announcing, doing a Kickstarter, doing an early access, getting a publisher. We gravitated all the steps to being approached by Microsoft about 2 months before E3 in 2018. So we were not actually in a position where we were looking to sell when we were approached. So we were more of in a reactive stance. And then so we had a discussion with Microsoft to see whether our business interest aligned. So I'm sure we'll get more into detail on that front. But I come at it from the point of I wasn't prepared and had no intention of selling when it was approached.
That's a wonderful story, and I think one that most founders hope to find themselves in that situation. And we're excited to learn more about it. Keith, what about you? Do you want to tell us about New World's journey?
Sure. So we were founded in late 2010. About 3 months after founding, I was invited to provide some consulting support to the then founder, and quickly joined him and kicked off building our first game, which launched in 2014. That game was Insurgency. We then went on to build A Day of Infamy and followed that with Sandstorm, Insurgency Sandstorm, first on PC and then subsequently on to PS4, PS5, Xbox One, Xbox X Series, and so forth. And so During the course of the first 10 or 11 years, our projects continued to increase in size. Our studio grew dramatically. We had an incredibly distributed workforce, which in a way prepared us for the last 2 years extremely well. And we were able to prosper during that last 2 years because we were so used to working as a distributed team. In any case, when we approached our next project, which is under development now, we realized we needed more money because our appetites had grown, the size of our community had grown, the project size had grown, and so we went to market, and we went to market looking for funding. I believe we made 17 pitches. They ranged from pitches for project funding, exclusive platform deals, to first party, second party, third party investments, and so forth. And most of the opportunities that were presented to us were sort of in the investment category. We ended up with 7 offers over the course of 4 months. And the final offer was the one we actually ended up taking, which was an acquisition, 100% acquisition offer from Embracer. And we made that choice for many reasons, all of which I'm sure we'll be talking about today. But fundamentally, our appetite had grown, and we were at the point where we were sort of evolving beyond an indie into whatever is the distinction for a double A with a eyesight toward a triple A. Most of our people are currently in Canada. We have a total of 65 people right now. We're growing very rapidly, but we're fighting the good fight there, which everybody is fighting to find talent. We have people actually around the world at the current time. We have a number of people in the United States. We have some people in Europe as well. But the concentration for us is in Canada, with our biggest footprint in Alberta, in Calgary. We have a small footprint in Vancouver, a small footprint in Toronto, and a small but growing footprint in Montreal.
It's amazing. So you've all come at this from very different perspectives, but I think one of the first questions a founder or studio head is going to start to ask themselves is, how do I know if acquisition is right for me? Is this the right path? What are the questions or timing that a studio should consider before they even start to entertain, is this the right choice for me? Who wants
Any
to
order
start
you
that
want
one?
us to go in?
Whoever's the hottest. Keith, go ahead. You start.
Okay. So I am closer to Scott in terms of the way I approach sort of running the business. I was actually the CFO for a number of years at the company here, and then the president and the CEO. And so I definitely have a business orientation. It's my belief that you should be prepared at all times to offer up your business. The problem in our industry is it's a little bit of a sawtooth pattern, or a hamster wheel, if you will, for smaller studios, where they spend all their money building a game, and then they make their money, and then they spend all their money supporting and going to the next game, and then they launch and make their money. And so we had to keep going back to the market. And we raised money, and we used the sales process, our strategy, to bring more money in, which in the end probably wasn't to our benefit because we were reducing the long-term value of one of our primary games. You put it on discount to bring more money in. That's great. You get your cash flow, but the problem is you're going to spend that cash flow along the way. So for us, the way I looked at it is I wanted to have a certain number of months, years in the bank at all times. Our projects were growing at all times. We were adding to our people at all times. So in my mind, we were always prepared to raise money, which is really hard as a founder, co-founder, because you're not focusing on your business, or in the case of Guillaume, on your development expertise. You're focusing on raising money and talking to investors, talking to platforms. So if you're prepared early, and you always have more than what you think you need, because nobody ever has what they really need because they're growing. I think that's pretty much ubiquitous. I used to tell my prior partner, whatever our forecasts are, cut them in half. Whatever our expense forecasts are, double them. Now let's see if the model works, and we have to have a minimum of 6 months in the bank. The truth is, that's the worst case scenario because it's hard to raise money in 6 months. I actually think it should be a year. He wanted it to be 3 months, and he was a creative, and I get it. But I think you have to be prepared very early on. And I know it's a little abstract to say that, but you have to have everything ready so that when you're going out to the market, to the platforms, to the publishers, to investors, that you're prepared to have that conversation. Even if it's not just for sale, it's just to bring money in. So, in my opinion, day one, you're preparing from day one.
So you should always
Yeah,
be
and
considering it as an option. Go ahead, Scott.
You have to.
yeah, if I could chime in, and obviously, yes, Keith and I are very much aligned because it's Blue Shirt Day, right, Keith? So the but I think to build upon Keith's point, like at the end of the day, it's all in the work that we do, certainly on the ops side, it's all in service to the creative within the studio. And so whatever I can do to ensure that the vision that they have for the games that they want to build can be brought to market, and that they have the creative freedom in order to exercise whatever direction they want to take the game, then that's what I'm here to do. And so if that means signing development agreements and funding agreements, so be it. If that means going down an acquisition path, then so be it. But ensuring that they still have that creative control, that's front and center. Like, we're not doing this because it's to make money. It's because we're so invested in the products and the titles that we want to bring to market and the vision that we have for our studio, that these are a means to the end. And so all of this is in service of that, and that was certainly front and center for us as we talked and engaged in conversations with Tencent. And the type of approach and structure that they wanted to have with us is very hands off, and like, hey, your business, we love what you're working on, we love the talent that you have coming to the table. How can we just make that work for you? And that's the conversation that is a productive, constructive one for sure.
A slightly different
Kim,
view. Yeah, it's just a slightly different viewpoint for us. Acquisitions was not really a trend in 2017, 2018. It's not you'd see it in the really, really big studios, but it was really not front of mind at all for us. And Microsoft kind of kickstarted the trend, and M&A has become a lot more common in the last 3 years. I had gotten to a stage, we had gotten at Compulsion to a stage where we had a lot of financial runway. We'd managed to get all the way to shipping a $60 retail title, mostly self-financed. There was some institutional funding, but we self-financed the whole development. Gearbox, our publisher, was financing all the marketing pieces of it. So I was in a place where I wasn't immediately hungry for money. I knew that we'd have probably at least 2 to 3 years of runway once the game shipped. The biggest consideration for me, as someone who's creative, fiercely independent, probably less. I've gotten quite financially literate over the decade that I was running the studio prior to the acquisition, but less focused specifically on the finances at that point in time because we'd gotten some runway. The biggest kind of question for me was whether an acquisition, whether the business imperative and the business strategy that the company or the acquirer had for our studio was really in line with the creative desires of our team. And first parties, meaning since Sony, Nintendo, Microsoft, were acutely kind of interesting for that because they are not strictly looking at a P&L when they're looking at a game made by first party. You bring people to, whether it's Game Pass or to the Xbox. If I convince Scott to go buy an Xbox for Christmas, provided he can find one, Microsoft will make money on every game Scott buys on that platform afterwards. So our role wasn't purely a P&L role, and that gave us the opportunity to be a little bit more Wes Anderson, a little less Christopher Nolan, find our own kind of creative, artistic voice within a partner that had a mission that was a business mission that was aligned with what the team's creative goals were. So I think that was the number one thing that we looked at in terms of considering the acquisition.
Was was there ever any concern from any of you about the loss of creative control? Because obviously, when you're being acquired, you now have someone else that you need to run ideas by and that will ultimately have a final stamp on that decision making process. How did each of you feel about that with respect to your companies, and how did it change the creative process? Scott,
I
do you want
can
to start
comment
this
on
one?
that first.
Yeah.
Yeah, so for us, it was very front and center, and few of us in the studio, large number of people within the studio have come out of different organizations, and right, wrong, or indifferent. There's certainly restrictions placed on the creative aspect, and some of that is good, and some of it is bad, but it is what it is. So in going through this particular acquisition and more so a carve out and investment, we really wanted to make sure that the vision that we had set out for not just the current game that we're working on, Nightingale, but also the where we wanted to go as a studio over the next 3 to 5 years, that we were very much aligned and able to have control over that, and part of that is conversations then that you end up having along the way with, in the case of Tencent, other studios that were aware that they were had made investments or had purchased outright, and knowing people within the industry and just sort of having conversations with them and understanding, and everything that we've heard through our network was that yes, this is definitely the way that they operate, and then that's fantastic, right? It gave us a really good comfort level that we weren't about to go in and, you know, 3 years from now, roles change, somebody else is now in, and they decide, you're no longer making, Nightingale, you're now making a first person shooter, and we're like, what happened there? So definitely to my earlier comments, everything that we do on this side of the business is in service of the creative element within the studio, because without that, it's just not, I mean, there's nothing there to actually invest in.
Keith, Graham, anything to add?
Sure. Without a doubt, maintaining creative independence was absolutely crucial for the organization. Uh, and it's interesting. I'm sure we're going to get into the dialogue about what actually happened and what's the perception of what happened. But internally, we knew we needed to keep the team together. We were in the middle
Mm-hmm.
of projects that were new, that were in live ops, and did not want to rock the boat on that in any way. So it was absolutely part of the decision making process. And my counterparts were all on the creative side throughout the dialogues. So they were making sure that I was staying true to that. Obviously, I was working more on the business side because that's the role from which I come. And I appreciate Scott's comment about being of service, because he's absolutely right. Without the creative, there is nothing, at least nothing in the gaming space.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had to find a fit. And for us, it was also a cultural fit. It was also sort of a belief in the way you treat your people, how you grow a company, what latitudes you have in the decision making process that you make. I can't speak for Scott or for Guillaume. There's more reporting on our side at this point, especially because our acquirer is a public company. Both of yours are as well, of course. And so, we have to do a lot more reporting work, but that lands on my team. That lands on the biz
Mm-hmm.
ops operation. We try to insulate the creative side from any of those types of conversations so they can focus on what they do best, which is create. So I don't know that I'm adding anything really unique to what Scott
Mm-hmm.
said, other than to say it was 100% in the top two or three most important considerations, right up there with cultural fit, which was a super
Mm-hmm.
important consideration for us.
Okay, so I think, you're asking yourself these questions. Why would I want to be acquired? What are the goals and objectives that are important to me? So you're sort of putting this list together. The next question before you start to have some of these conversations, obviously, is what's my value? So before you start to engage all of, the experts and consultants, how do you do sort of a napkin or back of the napkin to start to gauge, are we in the ballpark? Is someone going to look at me and say, is this person, have they not done their homework? Do they not understand how we value companies? How do you start to determine what you believe your company is worth before you start to go to market? Who
I'll
wants
let
to
the
take that
financial
one
people
on?
answer that one
I
first. I think,
definitely want to
Yeah.
answer, but let the other guys
here's
go first.
well, there's a couple. There's a lot of circumstantial elements there to take into consideration, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like if you are a new company and you're working on your game hasn't shipped yet, all of the value
Mm-hmm.
is hypothesis, and so
Absolutely.
you do need market intelligence to be able to value
Mm-hmm.
companies that are at that stage of maturity, because they'll know what buyers are ready to pay for your specific situation and the
Mm-hmm.
tangible value of your project. If you have like a very mature business model where you've been seeing regular revenue and that revenue is predictably going to grow,
Mm-hmm.
then there's easy multiple EBITDA that you can actually apply to the company, and those are generally easier to do napkin maths on.
Mm-hmm.
The multiples that I unfortunately can't disclose what I know about it, but I do know that the multiples have increased in the last 2 years for the stable companies than they did before 2018. But that's generally how it's done for a stable company. For companies that generally are, I think in all our cases, we were not at that regular stage of maturity of
Mm-hmm.
having a regular business. If you do not have the knowledge or network, you really do need a person that you can talk to who understands what are the deals that are happening right now, what are the types of valuation that are happening right now based on your projections for how much revenue you think you're going to make on the game you're going to ship. That'd be my answer. I'll let Keith and Scott do
That's a
it.
good one. Scott, Keith,
I'm
anything
happy
to
to
add to
respond.
that?
Sure. So I had a little bit of a leg up because I came from M&A consulting work previously, where I represented sellers as an advisor. There are market multiples, as Guillaume suggested, and there's a wide range. And so for us, we were aware of the market multiples, but we tested those market multiples by speaking with an awful lot of people. We spoke to agents, we spoke to investment bankers, we evaluated deals, we spoke to all the contacts that we could possibly reach out to who'd gone through the process. We made pitches, we talked with people, and in our case, we made enough pitches that we started to coalesce around a certain valuation, a certain multiple. We were actually a mature company from the standpoint of demonstrating increasing revenue, increasing net profitability, so it wasn't terribly difficult. But when you're a new company and you have a new game, or when you have a sawtooth and one game is no longer in live ops and not generating much, it's much harder to come up with a
Mm-hmm.
number. Then it usually will relate to the people who are working on the team and how they can tie them up. And they're almost surely they being the acquirers, are almost surely going to create an incentive earnout model. And most acquirers, in my opinion, the sort of gold standard acquirers, are incredibly smart about it. They'll even give an opportunity for more if you exceed certain thresholds, which is a beautiful thing for creatives, because I think they have a belief that they're going to knock it out of the ballpark more often than not, and often they do. So we were aware of all of the market information, and we were testing those hypotheses along the way. If the deal wasn't good, an offer that we got in those 17 pitches, we would literally tell the next presentation when an offer came in, no, that's not high enough, and we keep leveraging up. We were in a kind
Mm-hmm.
of an interesting position. We probably didn't have the resources that Guillaume had, but we weren't in jeopardy. We just would have had to scale back our scope or extend out our timeline, and I would have had to gone back to the private markets to raise money from maybe our existing investors or a new pool of investors. So we were okay We didn't have a sense of urgency. We had a sense of urgency with our appetite, our desire to get to the next step. And we were in no man's land. And I mean, we were at a price point from the next project where we were too big for most of the publishers we would likely talk to. We were too small for the monsters, for the first parties and the second parties. We just didn't quite fit. So we were in a very unusual space. We did not go out to market looking to sell. It just happened to
Hmm.
go that way. And we had offers between 30% equity and 51% equity. And then the last one was 100% equity. And the valuation was the right multiple. It was fair. And so we took it.
Scott, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would just say that, and it's been touched upon here, is that we're certainly of that group of studios that while we were 100 people, we actually hadn't taken our game to market. In fact, at the time that we were having the conversations, that in fact hadn't even been publicly announced. We did our public reveal of Nightingale at the Game Awards in December, at which point conversations were well underway. And so the at the end of the day, what Tencent was interested in was, sure, we pulled together a P&L, a revenue forecast for what we think we're going to be able to do with Nightingale. To Keith's point, we're going to, knock it out of the park. And we have strong belief that we're onto something special with the work that's going on in that title. So yes, they are very interested in kind of where we saw the title and how that translated into the financial performance of the studio. But perhaps even more importantly, they were interested in the talent that we had assembled and the opportunity of what that represented. Not, oh, great, you're bringing Nightingale to market. What does that look like? It was, what's the vision of this studio over the next 3, 5 years, 10 years? They're investing in the long term, and that's what really excited them, because of the quality of the talent that we have been able to assemble. They saw significant potential in that, in alignment with where we kind of thought our opportunity existed to be in the market and the genres that we were interested in exploring. That's what really tipped them in our favor, to not just look at what's going on today, but where we wanted to be in the future. And that talent that we had assembled was so critical. You put up a screen of all the titles that everybody in our studio has worked on, and it's a very compelling story of, we've got a solid pedigree here across multiple genres, and senior level talent that we'd able to assemble. It was a good story for us. So definitely talent is key. Yes, your current day-to-day thing, that's of interest, but it's the talent. That's what they're investing in.
So,
Yeah, I want to second just what Scott
go
said
ahead.
for a second.
Mhm.
There's the money and the EBITDA multiple, but the strategic decision to acquire a company has to do with what games they'll make in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Microsoft didn't care at all about We Happy Few. They were just like, we want this team
Right.
to build more content for the future. So being able to pitch that accurately in the process of I think that's the important decision, that as a studio head or founder, you should be concentrating in your discussions with it's okay, there's the money on this side, but like, here's the value. The value is the people, and here's why the people are going to stay, and here's the amazing journey that we're going to be on in the next couple of years if we go into business together.
100% agree. It's all about the future for all acquirers. Not the
So,
past. I mean, the past will give some valuation, but the future is going to give them the greater opportunity. What can we do with this team? What kind of games can they build? What's the likely success? What's the audience they built that they can leverage from? So absolutely agree with both of you.
so what I'm hearing is, I've decided that I want to go down this path. I have financials or all the stuff that I need and that, we have on hand, because we have to do it annually at minimum. But it's important to showcase the qualitative. So what is the goodwill that we have in this company? How can we culturally and align our goals with whoever it is we're pitching to? What do I need? I need, what do I need to have in my pitch deck, in my arsenal, as I'm prepping for these conversations? And in addition to the tools, who else do I need to be bringing along with me to these conversations, or not yet?
So we split it into two, and sometimes we gave both. We had an enterprise pitch, which was, fundamentally, what have we done? What's our history? What kind of success have we generated financially and otherwise? And then a game pitch, which was our next project. And it depended on who we were presenting to as to whether we gave one or the other or both. Sometimes with investors, we started only with the enterprise pitch, and then we would, when we went to step two, we would then give the game pitch. Sometimes we would provide for publishers only the game pitch. They didn't care about the enterprise pitch. So for us, there were two. And we included all of the information that you might anticipate would be in there, including what's the financial results that we've generated, what are our MAUs, our DAUs, how sticky are our games, how long do people play for, things of that nature. All of the metrics that indicate that we know what we're doing in terms of building the games and building a community, sentiment reports, promotional marketing information, coverage by media, things like that, to build a compelling presentation that we were dialed in, if you will, or that we knew what levers we needed to pull in order to continue to generate and demonstrate success, build a successful community, build successful games. And we told the history of the company in the enterprise component of it. Where did we start? What size were we? And to Scott's point, I don't know that our team is as pedigreed as your team. I like to think it is. But we certainly highlighted how many games has our team launched, what's the average tenure of our team. We gave a complete breakdown of the team in terms of structure, junior, mid, senior, director level, and so forth. And we tried to answer just about any question that we thought might be thrown at us. The key, I believe, is you're never going to have a finished presentation. You've got to iterate. You meet number one, they give you feedback. You fix it and add to it for number two. You fix it and add to it for number three. The challenge with that is you wish you could go back to number one by the time you do number 20, because you would be much better by the time. And we even started with 4 presenters, and we slowly reduced it down, and we ended up with one. But we practiced, we did our cadence, we timed it. We would try to get really dialed in the process. So that's what we did.
Yeah,
Scott?
shameless plug for finance and accounting people, which obviously is very self-serving. But the one thing through even a due diligence, right? Once the term sheet was signed, we were fortunate enough through being part of Improbable that they had their own internal general counsel and legal team that we were able to work with. In addition to that, we had outside support, because this was basically going to be a Canadian transaction. So we had a local counsel involved that was external, and then on the finance side, like that's where me and other members of the team, our IT team and everybody was involved. We had a working group that just hit the ground because there was just so much material that needed to get covered off, and so I know that again. I'm speaking from a fortunate position in that I had access to those resources, and primarily they were internal because we'd assembled a team internally, anyways, to run a studio. But it's a probably a more difficult or daunting task. That if you don't have that capability in house, you need to be prepared to invest in that capability to help you get through that journey. Otherwise, you're really going to be stumbling and or not able to properly participate in the conversations that are going to happen, for sure.
It's part of why I said you start at day one. And I don't mean you start because you're going to sell. You start because you're going to need to be prepared at some point, unless you're self-funded and have limitless capital, to need money. And people and the investors will always ask questions about your contracts and your agreements and your ownership and your copyrights, trademarks, et cetera, et cetera. So I think we'll cover that more elsewhere, but
Hmm.
I can't overstate how important that preparation is early, early, early. The moment you say, I'm going to be in business, I'm going to be a studio. That's my personal opinion.
Hmm. So I think that's an important topic, and we'll touch on it in a second. So Graham, I know you said that you weren't looking to be acquired, so it just organically sort of found you. But for Keith, you actively went out to seek out investment of some sort. You weren't quite sure what it was going to look like, but so did you just go through your Rolodex because you had experience in this space? Or is it something that
Well,
for for most of
I
you,
mean,
would you recommend someone do you do a call out and say, hey, we're actively searching for investment?
we did not use an RFP process. If that's sort of when you indicate a call out, what we did was we everybody that was part of prepping for the conversations put a list together of every target we thought was an approachable target. Then we went through and said, who do we have relationships with already? Who do we have contacts at? And that took a couple months before the 4 months of presentations, and we created our hit list, if you will,
Hmm.
and we just worked our way down the hit list. And as we learned, we checked people off, companies off, and added others to the mix. Some of them found us.
Hmm.
Because they had heard through the grapevine that we were out there looking. I attended DICE at the very early part of the process, and my intention was just to meet with everybody and anybody I could possibly meet with, and I had booked schedules. It's I would argue that it's mostly an organic thing, and for most people who at least have been in business for a few years, they're going to have far more context than they realize they have. They're going to know the industry far better than they realize they know it. And it doesn't take more than one or two calls to get to the biz dev people at Microsoft, at Sony,
Hmm.
at Tencent, at Crafton, at, wherever. Pick your poison, embrace her. It doesn't really matter. You will, it's very easy to get to the right people with just a
Hmm.
couple of reach outs. And that's what we did. We just reached out and we created our list. And I think there were 40 or 50 on the original list, and 17 ended up being pitched.
Scott, anything to add to that?
No, I mean it's for us. It was a small group that we wanted to
Hmm.
to go out and have conversations with. More the function of where we were at and what we
Hmm.
knew we had to do to fund the rest of the development to bring Nightingale to market. It kind of was a short list of companies that had the financial capital to be able to do that. We don't consider ourselves a AAA studio, but we consider ourselves a solid AA, and through that and the support that we were looking for, it was certainly a smaller list, but it was outreach from our part, and we were just fortunate enough that it was almost to Keith's point. Only takes a phone call or two, and in today's day and age, certainly over the last 2 years, for Guillaume, it was a different. I think you referenced earlier, it was a different market
Hmm.
back then, but over the last 2 years, the amount of capital that was flooding into the games industry made it a very easy phone call there, and in part, and I think we discussed this the other day, if us being remote and virtual and lockdowns existing and people not able to travel across international borders, I think it actually accelerated the
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
the the process here, because it wasn't about, okay, well, I think we can assemble a team and we'll be up there on Thursday and Friday in 2 weeks. Does that work for everybody? Let's kind of arrange schedules. For us, it was, we'll hop on a call at 7 o'clock at night, because now it's early morning overseas, and just work through those things. But it actually accelerated the process for us, working with some of the bigger partners that we were talking to.
So you do 20 pitches, you get 20 offers because the company and team is so amazing. Um, you pick the one that you think aligns the most with your goals and where you see the company going over the next 5 or more years. Um, Now you start the due diligence process, or the dreaded due diligence process, I should say. You know, what do you having gone through that process, and anyone that has ever gone through it knows that it's not a fun experience. It's a learning experience for sure. But what would you have done differently, or what do you think is really important for people to consider to prepare themselves so it can be as smooth as a process as it possibly can be? Graham, I'm actually curious to get your perspective on this because, as you said, you came at it from a creative side, and having learned the finance and accounting along the way, I'm interested to hear your perspective.
Yeah, well, I was. I mean, so we had an external counsel, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
on the case. Microsoft had a lot of lawyers, so I had to have a lot of lawyers too. So the first kind of stress is I'm bleeding hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees on a very, very
Mm-hmm.
rapid clip with a company that is much, much bigger. It's 140,000 people. um,
Mm-hmm.
uh, the other element is just being smaller at the time of the acquisition. We're 92 now, but we were 38 at the time. I didn't have a finance person on my team. I had an external bookkeeper, and I did the general kind of strategic financing for the company. And on typical calls, on just a financial matter, there'd be 22 finance people on Microsoft's side, on the side of the call. So it was, I'd say there's a combination of it being very intimidating and not really understanding what's the process, because you've signed the term sheet, but then there's this giant 1,000-page long, contract, the share purchase agreement contract that's being drafted, and kind of looking through every single, and our studio, because I am a creative, and we went through different stages of maturity, right? Like when we started, I would just chuck all my bills in the shoebox for the first couple of years and sign contracts on a napkin, and then we grew, and I hired a COO, and then we were a little bit more organized, and we started putting our contracts in Perforce, and we started having a little bit more. Then we hired an accountant, so our books. So the further you went back in the history of the company, the more messy it was. Um, and I found that really, really stressful as a process because I didn't really understand, like, are they looking for something that I've done wrong? Oh my God, if there's a voiceover artist in 2009 that I forgot to, or I've lost the contract that gave me the IP rights for his voice, is the deal going to be off? I mean, in context, of course, this sounds crazy. Microsoft just announced to 50 million people at E3 that they were buying us. But like, you go through these stress levels and stressors of understanding, like what is happening right now, and what's endangering the deal, what's not endangering the deal. And I would have been less stressed going through the process a second time, because what it came down to, at least in our case, what it came down to was a lot of this was just due diligence work to make sure that if there is anything that the company may have done wrong in the past, that the acquirer can protect themselves in cases of lawsuits or in cases where things go bad. And it was less a situation where there might be something that would cause them to walk away. I didn't have large skeletons in my history, just messy organizations when I started up. So if you can be organized and really kind of keep your contracts, make sure you have your IP rights correctly, that you're a standardized employment agreement set up, that will help the process. It will make it less stressful. But the company is also not acquiring you for your legal contracts. Like, that's the other element that is really important to remember through the process. They're acquiring you because they think you have talent, that your creatives can do really great, work in the future. So yes, it's stressful, but if you look at it from a strategic level, the paperwork is not the reason they're acquiring or not acquiring your company. And I think having a kind of a reminder throughout that process would have helped lower my stress levels.
Yeah, generally speaking, it's just a measure of risk at a point in time. So they just want to make sure that there's, something's been going on there in the background. And I would say, sort of oddly enough, at times through the due diligence process, particularly when you're dealing with a larger organization who has access to experts that they bring in, and external partners, that it's actually okay. You don't want to do it on every question, but it's okay to say no. So, you know what? You've got that information already, or that's really not germane. That's not relevant to the conversation. And the one thing that I that I will say is I've never met a third party on a deal, and this is across 25 years of professional experience where I've worked in different industries. I've never worked with an external group that's been engaged to work on something that's at billable hours where they're just like, you know what, it's good, pens down. It's like, no, at times you actually have to push back and be like, and do it from a position of strength, right? Yes, we're not trying to be deceitful, we're not hiding any information here, but no, we're not going down that question is has been answered, or it's actually not relevant, and put it back on them to come back and explain, provide rationale as to why that's actually an important consideration as part of the deal.
It's a good point. So why is this pertinent? And even just from a learning perspective, right? Like why do you feel this is so important for this conversation? Keith, I'm sure you have much to add to this.
I do have a lot to add, and I showed this picture when we originally met. This is what due diligence feels like. It's a brutal experience,
Or sometimes
and
just a regular Monday.
yeah, right. It's way worse than a regular Monday. Now, in our case, we did due diligence in 2 weeks, and I actually, in part, chose this particular transaction, this particular opportunity, because the due diligence was going to be accelerated. It is a brutal process. It is an emotional process, and to Guillaume's point, it is a process where you are questioning yourself and everything you did in the past. And the further back you go, the messier it is. It is the recurring theme that I will continue to reiterate. It's why preparation from day one is most important. Unless you have a crystal ball and know exactly what's going to happen to your organization and if and when you're going to need money and how you're going to need it and where you're going to get it, you might as well be prepared. There's something called a data room where you dump all of your contracts and your NDAs and your tax documentation, your payroll documentation, and it's parsed through by the attorneys, the business folks, the tax folks, and you sit and you defend all of them. And you get questions like, "Well, why'd you do that?" Well, how do you think you could do that? And you can't do that, and it's intimidating. When we prepped for this call, Guillaume made some comments about how intimidating it is, but then he put it in perspective, and I think it's really great what you said, Guillaume, and I'm going to echo it here. What everybody should understand is that the due diligence is not generally to kill the deal. It's generally to assess risk, because from the due diligence, a report is provided from the accounting firm, the tax folks, and the lawyers to the acquirer. And that report says, here are your issues of risk. And then they create something called reps and warranties. These are your representations and your warranties that you're going to sign when you transact, and you're going to guarantee them. And that if you understand, this isn't to kill the deal. This is to determine what you're going to have to guarantee that they view as a potential risk. Whether it's, do you have the IP right for that rock in your game that they don't quite know who built that rock in your game? And is it tangible? Is it material? Will it make a difference? Did you file your taxes? Is there outstanding debt that you haven't shown? So I think that helps put it in perspective about the stress associated. What's the purpose of it? The purpose is to get that report generated, and the report is a risk mitigation report. But anybody who starts a studio or is in business as a studio would do themselves a giant favor by making sure their house is in order. Their documents are signed on both sides. Your NDAs are signed. You have them, and you have them done. They're in a file in a place you can get to them. And so it's just an organizational process. That's really all it is. And compliance to make sure you've done everything that you are claiming you did. And so yes, it's very stressful. And for 2 weeks for me, it was extraordinarily stressful. And we had outside counsel and we had outside accounting. But when you're sitting in a Zoom room for 18 hours, literally, and there's 40 some odd lawyers and tax advisors and business consultants coming in and out of the room from the world's largest companies, and we were all bought by large companies, so their representation was large. It's intimidating, no question. There, I can't imagine anybody at any level of success who wouldn't find that at least uncomfortable at points. So prepare early, and you lower your stress.
I think that's just good business advice as well. Sometimes I think it's easier said than done in practice,
Oh yeah.
but it's definitely good advice to have. So you get through the due diligence, you sign the deal, you pop the champagne, you have a big celebration. What's life like the day after the sale for the founders, the senior management, but also for the teams?
Uh,
I'll
I would say, sorry, if I quickly
go
interject,
ahead,
I'll
Jessica.
build on Keith's point earlier in that, part of our role, at least on our side, is to isolate the dev team. And so, in fact,
Mm-hmm.
through that entire due diligence process, people have questions on the team, and there's only so much that you can share as you're going through a journey. But through that entire process, it's really about the creative side of the business. They just need to keep on doing what they're doing. It's not like everything just comes to a complete stop across the entire studio. So that's where we're ramped up and doing 60-hour work weeks in order to cram everything in, because we're not just keeping the business moving forward, but we're now dealing with the deal on top of it. It's sort of like our unfortunately crunch time, but you're like, I can see where this is going to end. And so I for the dev team and for the studio itself, it actually, nothing has changed. And for us, it's now, yes, you maybe have different reporting things that need to get sorted out, and now you're giving information to other people, whereas before it was all in house. But it certainly doesn't stop on day one. There's actually a ton of work that continues to happen, and that will go on for a couple of months, just getting through all of the closing conditions per se.
Mm-hmm.
But it certainly is a different world. But yeah, hopefully the creative has continued doing what they need to do. And Guillaume, I'd love to hear your opinion on it, because you were wearing multiple hats through that entire process.
Yeah, I mean, I think the number one thing that comes up is there's always a questioning that comes from a CEO standpoint as to what the role is after an acquisition, because you
Mm-hmm.
immediately shed a couple hats, right? Like it's one thing to run, it's one thing to wear the finance hat because you need to go get money, and it's a different one to run the finance hat to do reporting, for example. That's a different job. So when I had been creative director on the first two games, I took a step back during the acquisition project, and I had one of my creatives lead a creative project internally for the studio while I was going through the process. And then kind of coming at the other end of it, there's really the moment of going like, well, okay, I'm not doing creative. I'm not doing business anymore because I don't need money anymore. There's that moment. Well, what is it that I do in the company? And that was echoed across, I think, multiple founders that have shared that same stories, that there's a period of time where you kind of have to find yourself again within the studio. The other kind of thing that was interesting for us was, and I think this would have occurred regardless of the acquisition, but just from the fact of having gotten to a point where we had financial independence, that also created a lot of momentum within the team, because we'd spent 10 years kind of on the roller coaster to get money and leverage money. And so there's a focusing effect that has to do with the team when you're running out of money in 6 months. As Keith pointed out, that's a short period of time, and you got to ship your game in 6 months because you're running out of money. That kind of tends to focus everyone towards that goal. Um, I often compare it to like, well, if aliens invaded planet Earth tomorrow, all of our countries would stop fighting and go fight the aliens because the aliens are invading. And once the aliens are gone, we'll all go back to fighting again. Not to say that I had a lot of fighting on my team, but we had some things to figure out because you're acquired by Microsoft. There's suddenly a possibility, opportunity set. Team members who were like, well, we could become Guerrilla Games. We could go compete with Naughty Dog. I had other team members who were like, well, no, actually, we want to be like this indie hipster experimental, Wes Anderson space that we want to be. And that opportunity actually forced us internally to choose who we wanted to be now that we had choice. And that was one of the development, it's been 4 years now. So that's one of the development, hurdles that we had to go through to really define our identity as to who we wanted to grow up as a company. We're on the other side of that, which I'm really happy for and really thankful for today, because we have a clear vision about exactly who we want to be, what kind of products we want to make, what kind of creative teams we want to build. But that process was turbulent, and the acquisitions typically do have a period of turbulence that's associated with them. On the other side of that, when I felt like the team was in a good place, I looked at my job and I said, well, it's more of a caretaker job. I don't want to diminish it because it's an important job, but it's a caretaking job, making sure that Microsoft understands what we're doing, make sure the team is managed properly. But it was also not what I had signed up for, either as a founder or as an original creator. So I took the decision, this summer to promote someone on my team, delighted to become the general manager of the team, and I've concentrated myself to go back on kind of splitting my time between working with Microsoft on one side and doing creative work again, which is where I had my passion. So I rebuilt my place to be happy again once the team was stable. That was kind of our journey post acquisition.
And
So,
cognizant of, go ahead,
sorry.
Keith. I would say cognizant of time with 2 minutes left on the clock. Keith, final thoughts?
Sure, I can talk to that topic really quick. So I don't think we are quite on the other side of the turbulence, determining who we are, really how we want to focus, and it relates to sort of the continuum after the acquisition. First of all, I woke up the next morning, I was like, okay, that's great. Now what do I do? And to Guillaume's point, I was going to be doing something very, very different because I no longer had to go get money. I no longer had to do the platform deals, work with the publishers, and those things. Those are all gone. By the way, those are really exciting things that a business guy like me loved to do. But part of what I loved to do was work with the people, and I realized that that was where my attention needed to focus. So caretaker is a fine word without a doubt, but helping our team to find their place and to get through the inevitable conjecture, which I believe exists in our industry more than in any other industry I've seen. A lot of emotion about, well, what does this mean? Is all our creative control going to be taken away? Are they going to tell us what to do? Are they going to tell us when to do it, how to do it? Are they going to kill projects? Are they going to fire people? Are they going to install new people in our organization? And I think dealing with that perception and making that not the reality and getting through and creating your own reality is the important thing. And we're close. We're really, really close. It's palpable. I can sort of see to the other side if there's something to, really see. But that's the challenge after a transaction, in my opinion. Who are you? How do you deal with your team? How do you get them refocused without the fear of what it means to be owned by a very large company in all of our cases? So for us and for me, that's the process. After about a month, I was in a good mood, but the first month I was pretty depressed.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, gentlemen, for taking the time to share your experiences with everyone here at XP Game Developer Summit today. I hope everyone learned a lot.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.